Welcome to the System Simplified podcast, where we feature top leaders who share stories on how to successfully systemize a business. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hello, Adi Klevit here with the System Simplified podcast, where we feature top founders, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders about systematizing a business. And this podcast is being brought to you by Business Success Consulting Group, where we create, document, and implement processes and procedures for businesses so they can grow and scale. And today's guest is David Nilssen. Hi, David.
Hi, thanks for having me today.
You are very welcome. I'm so excited to interview you. I mean, you have an amazing story to tell and an amazing business where you basically create a borderless talent, which is such an important topic. And I interviewed several entrepreneurs that actually have talent all over the world, right? And they also, they talk about the importance of having that ability to do that, and also the ability, how it helped them scale and grow the business. So you actually enable others to do that, which is amazing. And we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the process on how to do that. We're going to talk about the advantages of it. But let me introduce you a little bit more formally. So you are the CEO of DOXA, which is DOXA. So our listeners can go and look it up. So DOXA Talent, which helps businesses to build and scale up high-performing borderless teams, leveraging talent from across the world. And today you have over 600 team members, and you have zero office space.
That's right.
I'm sure you have some office space in your home, right? I mean, you have to have a place where...
I do. I'm sitting in that right now, yes.
Yeah, especially when you shared before the call that you have two young kids. So I'm sure you have some kind of an office where you can close the door and work, but it's zero office space because your team members are all over the world. And in 2007, the U.S. Small Business Administration, the SBA, named you the National Young Entrepreneur of the Year. And you also serve on the global board of directors of the Entrepreneurs Organization, EO, which we are both members, and Guidant Financial. So you're definitely busy, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah. I think everything I do in my life either is around family or entrepreneurship, and I prefer to stay busy. So, but yeah, definitely keeping the calendar full.
That's fantastic. So before we start and dive in, we have to give a big shout out to John Corcoran and Dr. Jeremy Wise from Rise 25, who produce my podcast. They also produce your podcast. And we definitely appreciate their help and everything that they do for us. So big shout out. Thank you, John, and thank you, Jeremy. And good. So let's start with the first question is, how did you found DOXA? Like, what led you to start DOXA?
Yeah. So, I live in Boise, Idaho now, but, about a decade ago, I was in Seattle. And what the world is dealing with today in terms of scarcity of talent, rising costs, cost of living, all of that was something that we were struggling with in Seattle at the time. And I remember in about 2014, 2015, the rise of the $15 minimum wage, the 70K CEO, Amazon and Microsoft and Google and Boeing and all these companies are trying to gobble up talent in the local market. We were struggling to find and retain good people, even though we had a celebrated culture. So we started looking at offshoring as a way for us to decentralize the organization, give us access to new talent pools. And we saw great success with it, but we didn't appreciate the way that a lot of the industry operated in terms of how they paid people, how they provided benefits, whether they were actually formalized as employees or contracted. And there's lots of challenges with that industry. And ultimately, we saw this big gap. There's lots of companies out there promoting the super VA and lots of companies who wanted you to sign up for multi-year contracts and hundreds of people. And we were a small to medium-sized business who just wanted to start with 5, just test it out. And so we saw a big gap there, both philosophically and then those serving, and decided to sort of jump in and make it work for us. But ultimately, we were building process and systems on top of this other company and realized that we could probably productize that and take it to market and help other small businesses figure out how to successfully build and scale global teams. And that's sort of the genesis behind DOXA.
I love it. And especially when you mention processes and systems. But that's great. I mean, and I do understand what you're talking about. I mean, I have many of my clients are outsourcing and there are different ways of doing it, different companies out there. What is so unique about DOXA? Like, what are the things, you mentioned some of the things you did not like, right? But in general. So let's dive in terms of what are the common mistakes that you see that happen when entrepreneurs are trying to hire talent offshore or nearshore, and how did you overcome that? What is your approach?
Yeah, look, there's a lot of challenges. Some of them have to do with the companies, some of them have to do with the industry. I'll say, like, to your question about like, what are some of the common issues? So one of them is just entrepreneurs in general aren't often clear. It's probably one of the reasons why your business exists, right? Like they tend to say, oh yeah, I could use someone to support my business, but they're not exactly sure of the use case. They don't really have the systems built out. They're not sure what the processes are. And then they say, well, global talent didn't work for me. Right. So that's one example of, hey, not being very clear about what's the use case and what's the exact sort of experience that we need for somebody to be successful in this role.
Right.
On the structural side, I mean, there's an opportunity for people to either use websites like Fiverr and Upwork to just go directly to somebody for project-based work. You have the opportunity, if you have what I would call a sustainable need in the business for a particular skill set, you can contract them or hire them. What I've seen historically is that many people choose to contract, and sometimes that works well, but oftentimes they're able to pay less, provide less benefits, less stability. Those individuals aren't protected by those local laws or given some of the stability benefits of being an employee. And that was something at the very beginning we saw we wanted to be different. So we employ every single person directly. They're provided with full family benefits. We've got a learning and development team that's helping to upskill and up-level them as professionals and people. We let them all work from home. So like in the Philippines, where we have a big portion of our people, the average person commutes 2.5 hours a day. That's almost 20 days away from their family sitting on public transportation in traffic. And then, to sort of help with that, we've invested in lots of remote management tools, cybersecurity, upgrading their internet, things like that. So from our standpoint, the things that we are doing first is making sure that there's a stable environment for them to be employed by, so they get the benefits of that and the protection associated with it. The second is we're investing in their career development, which in the offshoring world, that typically doesn't happen because someone like myself could hire somebody, but then we, make them available to you. And now who's developing that person? They're the offshore worker for the company, so they typically underinvest in them, but they're really not working for us day to day, so we don't invest in them. And so we've tried to really fix that. And then the third is work-life balance. And so the idea of letting them work from home, but not compromising data and security as a result of doing that. So all the hardware is ours. In fact, that's actually another point. I've seen so many people who contract workers in another country. They let them work on their own personal computers without the security and remote management capabilities to protect them and their clients. And so there's a lot of things there. But one of the things we've actually done historically, and I noticed you had Jay Bardot on your podcast, right? From Zeitworks. This is a company that we've spent time with. And actually, for some of our clients, we put their system in place, RPA in place, to make sure that people understand a little bit more what's happening across all the different processes and procedures that they run within their organization as their team gets larger. And we can start to compare and contrast the super users against those that maybe are not as productive. So lots of stuff inside of that.
Wow. That's really impressive in terms of like having, so you basically have, what you're saying is that you have a very specific process on how to actually make sure that the employee is being taken care of. So then you can have better employees. You're basically creating that culture with the offshore employees. So then they can produce and work for the companies that hire them. So I think that's definitely a unique approach that differentiates you from others for sure.
It's actually, I want to just share one last thing. What you said resonates for me. We're very clear inside our business that we serve our team members first. Our clients actually are second. And our belief is if we take good care of our people, they'll take good care of our clients. And I remember you brought up culture. So we actually created a conference called DOXA. And DOXA happens in the Philippines or Vietnam, one of the two locations, every single year. And we invite our clients to come in and be part of a charitable or CSR activity there in the area that we're in. Then have a holiday party and celebrate with us together. And then the next day is a full day of learning. Think a mini university or a regional event like we would see in EO. And we curate this experience, one, to make sure that we're catalyzing relationships between our clients and our workers, that we're reinforcing the culture that we really want to be a part of. And walking away from that, one of the people that was at that particular conference said to me, Dave, it's funny, I knew you guys had a purpose, but I actually think you guys are a purpose with a business, not a business with a purpose. As a result of being there and seeing the culture we're creating, how we treat our people, it was sort of an eye-opening moment for her.
Oh, wow. That's incredible. So how many of your clients actually take you up on it and fly to the Philippines or to Vietnam to meet the people in person?
Yeah. So I'll tell you, when we first started this, and then I'll answer your question, I was a little bit nervous about doing this. When I was, first offshoring, when I was leading Guidant Financial, I went to the Philippines and Vietnam twice a year. So I would go once around the holidays to celebrate with them. And, I would share, hey, this is how we did this year, and this is where we're going next year. They actually got to see it even before our domestic teams. And then in the summer, I'd come out there for like a, little barbecue activity. But the idea was, hey, these people matter to us. And we have these cultural events here domestically. We need to do the same for them and make sure that they know that is important to us. So this is something that I always did with our team. When we started DOXA, we wanted to create that same experience, but was nervous. Like, how many people are willing to pay the dollars to fly that far to spend 1 or 2 days with their people? And it turns out that actually half of our clients came. So when we did our first one, 50% of our clients came, and now the momentum has continued to build. And so we're actually going to be launching the next iteration of that in a few months, and really excited about the sort of the way that it's continuing to grow and evolve. And at some point, we believe it'll become a premier industry conference and not just for our clients.
That's amazing. Wow. That's definitely, that is different for sure. So, you are 100% remote, right? And what would be your advice to our listeners that are listening to us right now in terms of creating a good remote culture using offshore employees? What are the key, and we talked about what you create for them, but I'm now and you talked about the conference, but I'm talking about the interaction itself between clients and employees to actually create that good remote culture where the offshore employees that may or may not meet their team members. Maybe they will meet the owner and maybe key executives that will come to the conference, but they are also working with team members that they may never see in person, right? So what are some of your key points that you like to share with people in terms of your experience of creating that culture, the remote culture with offshore employees?
Yeah. So let me, great question. And let me clarify just sort of, I would say, the philosophy behind why we do this. So I'm going to go back about 5 years ago when I was still the CEO of Guidant Financial. And at that time, as I shared, we had gone from everyone in Seattle, Washington to now some people offshore. We started to hire a few people remotely. We built a satellite office in Boise. But collectively, it's about 200 people. And I remember that when everybody was in one office, we were a best place to work for, 7 years. We were, a culture that I was super excited about. And I remember we had a Wordle on our wall when you walked into our offices. And the Wordle were just 3 words that we had asked everybody in the company to share that define the Guidant culture from their perspective. And the number 1 and 2 were family and fun. And I wore that like a badge of honor. But I think culture has shifted and the expectation of the worker has shifted. When we decided to start decentralizing the organization, our culture changed overnight. All of a sudden, we had 2 classes of team members. We had those that were in the office who had quick access to leaders and who got to have water cooler talk and could sit and build relationships in the workroom. And then everybody else who sort of stalked from cyberspace in Zoom calls while we all met in an office. It was an awful experience. And it's funny, it never really dawned on me how bad it was until I was the one who was traveling and calling in for a leadership team meeting. And my whole team is sitting around a board having a conversation. And I couldn't even interject into the conversation. I had to like hit the raise hand button, sit there and wait and hope that somebody noticed I was on the screen. And it was in that moment when we were also decentralized where I said, listen, everybody's on the same playing field. As one person is remote, everyone is going to be remote. So that helped. That helped in that moment. But we still really sort of fumbled our way through this hybrid environment. And then COVID happened. And when COVID happened, we were all forced to go remote at the same time, working the same way, using the same tools, following the same processes. And all of a sudden, the cultural issues sort of evaporated. Now, there were other challenges, certainly, with that. But what we saw in that moment was, hey, look, if everyone is in the office, everybody operates the same way. If everybody's out of the office, everybody operates the same way. But when you're all, sort of spread across different experiences, it becomes much harder. And so the places where, for me, it really stood out was one, when you work in an office, you manage by site, right? That's just the easy default. When you are out of the office, you manage by objective. But when you're in the middle, you're sort of bifurcated. And then for us, like with the all company calls and with the team meetings, if everyone is on the same tools, great experience. If they're on different schools, completely inconsistent experience. And so for us, we felt like we could do either and be best in class. But if we did the middle, the hybrid, then we would effectively be paying for both and not to be best in class in either. So that's why we made the decision to go that way. Now, in terms of how do we make it work? For me, it's all about communication and connection. And we've built, you'll appreciate, a process around this. And it's really 3 buckets. It's connection to the purpose, connection to the leader, and then connection to each other. And we've built some rhythms. Some are required, some are optional because we want some personalization in terms of what people can draw. But, connection to purpose would be things like, hey, we've got a Monday morning stand-up where we talk about our people and we talk about our values and we talk about our clients and sort of connect them to what we're doing and why we exist. And then, the connection to the leaders, clearly the supervisor, the one-on-one with them makes sense in the development plans. And then connection to each other, it's things like, hey, we've got this quarterly engagement event. We've got all-day virtual connection meetings. We do coffees with, sort of random people within the organization. We break them up into teams and let them do that. And there's lots of different pieces for each of these. But for us, it's about, making sure that we're broadly communicating very clear and effectively, and then make sure they're connected to the purpose, to the leaders, and to each other. So that's sort of how we deal with it.
That's great. And, that reminds me of another episode I recorded with Kate Winkler from the CEO of Ruby.com. And she talked about how they transformed from an in-office environment to virtual. And she gave great tips on culture, which definitely very much aligns with what you're saying. And I had another episode where I interviewed the co-founder of Carbon.com. And we talked about how to create that remote culture. And it's what you're saying, it's that connection. It's connection with each other. It's connection with the leadership, connection with the purpose. So spot on. But I wanted to go back to what you said about the hybrid environment, which is very interesting because nowadays you hear, well, hybrid, that's the way to go. We went totally from going into the office to completely virtual to now going back. And I agree that, you have to have the same tools. You have to be on the same terms because otherwise it creates that polarization as opposed to making it united. But what about people that do not want to work from home or cannot work from home? Like they don't have the environment. They have little kids, they can concentrate. I mean, do you still provide them with, how do you handle that?
Yeah. Well, look, I'll do my best to be clear and concise, which is not my expertise. A couple of things I would say. One is I think post-COVID, the employment landscape has changed a lot. So we could talk about talent scarcity. We could talk about workspace indecisiveness. But there's actually a host of new personas that have emerged post-COVID. I'm a huge fan of sort of global HR trends. And what you'll see right now that is becoming sort of a hot topic is that there's no longer one person you're recruiting for. There's actually 5 different groups, 4 of which I take seriously. And this traditionalists, these are people that, want to go to work every day. They'll work at your company for 5 years as long as they're paid well and they see that, that they can sort of have that work-life balance. They're good. Then you've got caretakers who, to your point, may not have the space, or they're taking care of a child or an elderly parent, and they really need flexibility and to be paid very well. Do-it-yourselfers is the other one, and those are people that want radical flexibility. And then finally, you have the idealists who want career advancement and want to be connected to a purpose. So if you're just recruiting for one person, but you're not clear on what you offer as an employer, what your employer brand represents, then you could be hiring the wrong person. So for example, traditionalists like to be in the office. I probably shouldn't hire that person. Like that my environment won't cater to what they actually need to fulfill them. However, the caretakers who want radical flexibility and the idealists who want to be connected to a great purpose and career advancement, as you've heard in some of the things I've talked about, those are clearly the people we want. They don't need to be in office. They want lots of flexibility. They want to be managed by objective, but they want to be part of something bigger than themselves. And so that's one way that we deal with it, is to make sure that we're really clear about who we are so that people can opt in or out based on that. And then to your, again, I'm someone who cares deeply about process. In fact, when we started DOXA, for the first year, I said, no technology whatsoever. Technology is not there to solve our problems. Technology is to enable good process. And if we don't know what that is, we shouldn't make those investments yet, right? So I'm a huge fan of creating clarity first. But when we think about being offshore, not offshore, in a remote world, if someone is thinking of making that transition, the one thing that have to be really careful of is when you work in an office, you can be sloppy. When people think about onboarding and training in an office, what typically happens is they just say, hey, you're brand new. You're going to sit next to Tom because Tom does what you're going to do, and you're going to learn from him over the next 2 weeks, because we don't really have a formal onboarding and training plan. That doesn't work in a remote world. So how you hire, who you hire, how you onboard and integrate and train those people, and then the benefits, the flexibility, the location, all those things are going to be things that have to be sort of vetted out before someone makes that transition.
100%. And also the communication, it's the communication lines and how you communicate and the systems to communicate are extremely important.
Yep.
So that is something that has to be taken into account as well as part of the systems. Like, how do you communicate? What are the communication lines? But also, what do you put on your communication lines, right? I mean, it's not the emails back and forth you communicate. What do you communicate via Teams or Slack? What do you communicate via email? What do you actually pick up the phone? What do you do on a Zoom call? All of those things have to be part of it in order to create that. But I love that experience that you're sharing in terms of, you just have to decide the environment that works for you. You have to decide an environment, and then you have to decide on the persona or the qualities or the type of person that will work for you. Because just like with an ideal client, you have to figure out who is your ideal employee. And maybe what you're offering is not good for those that want more of the traditional settings. And it's okay, but just know that ahead of time. So that's how you create a good cultural fit. Absolutely, I agree with you. David, what are some of the benefits that you have seen for companies that have global talent as opposed to just concentrating on one geographical zone or their own area? What are some of the benefits that they experience?
Yeah, so I will just start by saying, when I went down this path, for us, we were not looking to cut costs. We were looking to scale faster, to gain access to new talent pools. And when I started thinking about, well, if I'm going to manage somebody from Seattle to Florida, then what's the difference from Seattle to the Philippines or Vietnam or somewhere else, as long as we have the right tools and processes in place to be able to manage that effectively. So for us, it was a growth strategy. And I remember when I sat in front of my team and we were going to start going down this path, I knew people would start to panic internally if we said, hey, we're going to start using offshore talent. They'd immediately be wondered, like, what does this mean for me? So when we sat down with them, we drew a line in the sand and said, hey, I want to be really clear. We think this is a capability that, everyone, including us, is going to have to develop over time in order to remain competitive. But no one is going to lose their job as a result of going offshore. This is a growth strategy, not a cost-cutting exercise. So for me, the benefits that we saw, some were intended and some were actually accidental. So intended was, hey, look, we did start to reduce our labor as a percentage of revenue as we grew because we were diversifying into other talent pools. That was sort of a known benefit that was going to be coming to us. We were able to access equal or better talent faster than if we had just stayed in Seattle trying to slog it out with everybody else. One of the things that was really exciting, though, that was sort of what I would call an unintended benefit, is that we actually saw culture improve for us. So at the time we decided to go down this path, we were rated, I think, 3.7 or 3.8 out of 5 on Glassdoor. It was always like, as you know, Glassdoor, sometimes people like to go and complain. But if you look at our Glassdoor ratings today at Guidant Financial, they're like 4.8 out of 5. What's happened is actually people that stay with us for over a year get promoted, because as we continue to expand offshore, we need more supervisors and managers and leaders and strategists and analysts and L&D or learning and development experts. So people that stay with us for over a year, 78% of them have been promoted. In 2021, in the middle of a pandemic, and by the way, we serve brick and mortar Main Street American small businesses. So when the pandemic first hit, I thought, oh man, what does this mean for our business? But in 2021, 50% of our team took on a new role. So we saw people actually starting to impact more and learn more, and as a result, earn more because we were investing so much offshore. In fact, in 2020, we launched 2 new products. So we were more innovative as a company as a result of that. So what I've seen is that you have access to great people who provide a great value to the organization, who bring a work ethic that is inspiring to a lot of people. And it, as a result of that growth, still requires additional investment onshore. So the unintended consequence, or unintended benefit, I should say, is that by investing offshore, we actually created more opportunity onshore as a result of doing that.
Right. So it's basically, the advantage is not necessarily, you look at it from, again, it's the purpose. The purpose is not to just cut costs. Although, if there are businesses that's what they want to do because they want to hire, but it also leads to the scaling, because if they want to cut costs so they can expand, right? It depends on the motivation of the business owner, but I really like that approach of like the main motivation is the ability to scale fast and utilize talent that exists, that is ready to work, and that also you can afford, so you can actually scale, which means like you can also be profitable, not just grow like crazy with losing profits. So for sure.
I would add one more thing, though, that I think is important, because not every company is what I would call rapid scaling mode, right?
Right.
But in an environment like we're in today, when you've got, we all know what's kind of happening externally, but there's, access to capital is not as easy as it used to be, certainly not as cheap. You've got supply chain issues for sure. Inflation is going to continue to be there. And then you have this sort of workspace issue, the talent scarcity, and all the new personas that we talked about. If somebody, on average, by moving offshore, people save somewhere between 60 to 70% on the fully burdened costs for these types of roles. So it's a pretty significant benefit. And in some ways you could say, well, I could hire 2 to 3 people for the same cost. That is true. So for example, one of the niches that we serve today, about 30% of our team are in the accounting/finance roles. Everything from accountants to CPAs to AR and AP, bookkeepers, payroll clerks, analysts, things like that. That is a really hot market here in the US. So if I've only got one accountant and that person leaves, then business stops for a period of time. And so what a lot of our clients are doing is actually, as they grow, now going offshore, hiring multiple resources so they don't have just one point of failure, and it gives them more flexibility as a business as they continue to grow. So that's another benefit.
Absolutely, because you can have backup and you can have cross training and etc. for sure.
Yes.
Another one is also the flexibility of the hours. If you want to have your business operating 24/7, or if you want customer service also after hours, or like, for instance, I have a client who is a dentist, and his staff work 4 days, 10 hours, 4 days. But then on Friday and after hours, if you have a new patient calling in, you get an answering machine. But if you actually can get somebody live or that somebody can get back to them right away, I mean, that makes a huge difference. I have another client who has a plumbing company, the same thing. If you actually pick up the phone, if you start calling somebody because you need help right there and somebody's actually on the other line answering you, you're more likely to engage with that company.
100%. In fact, I would say approximately, although not, like I said, it's approximately about 10% of our clients are what they call MSPs, or IT managed service providers. So small businesses don't really have the number of team members to justify having a systems admin, a help desk, a cybersecurity expert, software, hardware, that kind of stuff. So they source that out. Those companies need access to people 24/7 because the reality is their clients operate in that way. And if somebody goes down, if a piece of hardware fails, or if the system for some reason stops working, they need someone who can troubleshoot those issues right away. And so we see a lot of that, people who want to come and make sure their business can operate on a longer time schedule than the typical 9 to 5. This is a fantastic way to do that.
Absolutely. Yes. And there's also the diversification. People from around the world give different perspectives and give different ideas. And especially if you are a business that serves somebody internationally or even nationally outside of your zone, you get that diversification and those different viewpoints and ideas, which definitely is also a benefit of having an offshore or a borderless talent.
Yeah, there's no question about that. There's the diversity in general and the diversity of thought. When you talk about people from different places in the world, it definitely brings a different perspective. And we've seen that. We actually talk about this. It's actually one of the opportunities and challenges of running, an international organization, is that you have these different cultures and different, backgrounds and beliefs and what have you. And we talk about creating one culture, one DOXA. The reality is we actually believe that it's important to maintain some unique sort of individualization in these different regions because we want them to bring that to work every single day and improve that diversity.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, David, I'm sure we can talk for another hour if we wanted to, which would be great. But, I try to keep the episodes in a manageable time so our listeners can listen to it and enjoy it from beginning to end. So as we're coming to the end of this episode, what is the best way to reach you if we have listeners right now that want to reach out?
Oh, yeah. Well, the website is just simply doxa7.com. It's DOXA and then the number 7.com. Or you can find me on LinkedIn, just David Nilssen.
Fantastic. Well, David, thank you so much for being a guest on this podcast and sharing all this knowledge and expertise. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Thanks for listening to the Systems Simplified podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.